Getting fired for being 2 minutes late seemed like the worst day of my life, until I discovered what my boss was really hiding. How was I supposed to know that those 120 seconds would expose a $10 million fraud and change everything? If you want to see how I took down a corrupt executive and turned my career disaster into the biggest victory of my life, make sure to hit subscribe and smash that like button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. That morning still haunts me. The subway had stalled between stations for exactly 7 minutes. I remember checking my watch repeatedly, feeling the anxiety build as each second ticked by. By the time I rushed through the glass doors of Pinnacle Financial Solutions, I was 2 minutes late. 2 minutes that would change my life forever. Hazel, my office. Now. Richard Blackwell's voice cut through the hushed morning atmosphere of the office. As the CFO of Pinnacle, his word was practically law. I placed my coffee on my desk and straightened my blazer, trying to appear composed despite my racing heart. The other analysts avoided eye contact as I walked the long corridor to his corner office. They knew what was coming. Blackwell had been on a termination spree for weeks, looking for any excuse to cut staff ahead of the quarterly report. "Close the door," he said without looking up from his computer. His office was meticulously organized, with financial reports stacked in perfect alignment, much like the precision he demanded from everyone but himself. "Mr. Blackwell, about this morning. You were late." He finally looked up, his expression devoid of emotion. "That's the third time this month." "Sir, the subway—" "I don't care about the subway, Hazel. I care about reliability. When I hired you 2 years ago, you promised excellence. Being on time is the bare minimum of professional conduct." The irony wasn't lost on me. Blackwell routinely arrived at 10 a.m. after his breakfast meetings that everyone knew were actually golf games with clients. "Your performance has been slipping," he continued, pulling out a folder I'd never seen before. "Your reports have been late. Your projections inconsistent." This was completely false. My last performance review had been stellar, with my financial models being adopted company-wide. I had even stayed late 3 nights last week to help complete the Johnson acquisition analysis that Blackwell himself had neglected. "With regret," he said, though his face showed none, "we're terminating your position, effective immediately." The shock must have registered on my face because he added, "Human Resources has your final paycheck and separation agreement. Security will escort you to clear your desk." "This is about the Davis account, isn't it?" I asked, suddenly understanding. The flicker in his eyes confirmed it. Last week, I had questioned some unusual transfers in the Davis real estate portfolio, transactions that didn't follow our standard protocols. When I'd asked Blackwell about them, he'd dismissed my concerns, saying they were executive-approved exceptions. "This is about punctuality and performance," he stated flatly. "Sign the separation agreement, take the severance, and move on, Hazel. It's just business." As security watched me pack my personal items into a cardboard box, I noticed my coworkers' sympathetic glances. Jen from accounting slipped me a note with her personal email. "This isn't right," she whispered. Outside, the spring sunshine seemed to mock my situation. I had just bought a condo in Brooklyn, stretching my finances on the promise of the bonus I was due next month. Now I was unemployed with a mortgage I couldn't afford. But something didn't add up. Firing a senior financial analyst over 2 minutes when the company was in the middle of 3 major acquisitions. It made no sense unless Blackwell had something to hide. That night, after sending out 15 job applications and updating my LinkedIn profile, I opened my personal laptop. Before leaving, I had emailed myself several reports I'd worked on, all properly sanitized of client information, of course. These were my work products, examples for my portfolio. At least, that's what I told myself. But as I reviewed the Davis portfolio analysis, something caught my eye. The routing numbers for several large transfers didn't match our usual payment processors. In fact, when I cross-referenced them with my banking database from a previous job, they led to a small bank in the Cayman Islands. This wasn't just unusual. It was potentially illegal. I closed my laptop and poured myself another glass of wine. Getting fired was bad enough. Discovering potential fraud was dangerous. I needed to be smart about this. The next morning, Jen called me. Hazel, are you okay? The office is buzzing. Blackwell told everyone you were let go for sharing confidential information with competitors. What? That's completely false. I know, she said. Nobody believes it. Listen, there's something else. The Davis account? All the files have been moved to a secured server. Only Blackwell and the CEO have access now. That confirmed it. Something was very wrong at Pinnacle, and my questions about those transfers had made me a liability. Jen, I need your help, I said, making a decision that would set everything in motion. Can you meet me for coffee? There's something I need to tell you. By the time we met at a small cafe far from the office, I had a plan. It was risky, potentially career-ending if I was wrong, but I couldn't ignore what I'd found. The numbers never lie, and these numbers were telling a story of deception that reached the highest levels of Pinnacle Financial. I think Blackwell is embezzling from client accounts, I told Jen as she sat down. And I'm going to prove it. Her face paled. Hazel, that's a serious accusation. If you're wrong, I'm not wrong, I said with more confidence than I felt. The question is, are you willing to help me expose him? Jen looked around nervously, then leaned forward. What do you need? That was the beginning of what would become the most stressful, terrifying, and ultimately vindicating 4 weeks of my life. I didn't know then that Blackwell's fraud scheme was just the tip of the iceberg, or that my 2-minute tardiness would eventually save not just my career, but the financial security of hundreds of Pinnacle's clients. The cafe where Jen and I met became our unofficial headquarters. Every evening after she finished work, she would bring me internal reports that I couldn't access anymore. We were careful, she never emailed anything, and we used a secure messaging app for our communications. He's moving money again, Jen said one evening, sliding a printout across the table. $3 million from the Westfield Pension Fund, disguised as an administrative fee. But look at the percentage. I examined the document. Administrative fees were typically 0.5% to 1% annually. This was a one-time 4% fee, completely unjustifiable. He's getting bolder, I said. Or desperate. Over 2 weeks, we tracked suspicious transfers totaling nearly $7 million. But we needed more evidence to prove it was fraud, rather than just aggressive fee structures. The breakthrough came when Jen managed to get access to Blackwell's calendar. He's meeting someone at the Grand Hotel tomorrow. It's not in his official schedule. I found it in a draft email. I need to be there, I said immediately. Hazel, that's crazy. If he sees you, he won't. I'll be careful. The Grand Hotel's lobby was elegant but busy enough to provide cover. I wore sunglasses and a hat, positioning myself behind a large floral arrangement with a clear view of the entrance to the hotel restaurant. At precisely noon, Blackwell arrived, checking his watch impatiently. 5 minutes later, a man in an expensive suit joined him. I didn't recognize him, but when Jen ran his image through social media later, we identified him as Victor Renard, an executive at First Cayman Trust, the same bank where those suspicious transfers were going. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I managed to take several photos of them exchanging what looked like documents. When Renard left, Blackwell remained, ordering another drink and making a phone call. Taking a risk, I moved closer, pretending to be waiting for the restroom. It's all proceeding as planned, I heard him say. By the time the quarterly audit happens, everything will be clean. Trust me, $10 million is just the beginning. My blood ran cold. $10 million. That confirmed what we'd pieced together and suggested there was even more we hadn't found yet. Back at my apartment, Jen and I compiled everything we had. The evidence was damning, but still circumstantial. We needed definitive proof that Blackwell was the one authorizing these transfers, and that they were indeed fraudulent. There's only one way, Jen said reluctantly. We need access to his email. That's impossible without the IT department's help, I replied. Not necessarily. Jen hesitated. There's a new IT guy, Mark. He's been helping me recover some corrupted files. He mentions how weak our security protocols are all the time. You think he'd help us? I think he'd help me, she said with a slight blush. He asked me out last week. Mark turned out to be our secret weapon. After Jen explained our suspicions, over dinner apparently, he agreed to help. "Your system's a joke," he told us when we met. Blackwell's password was his birthday followed by boss. Classic narcissist move. With Mark's help, we got access to Blackwell's email for 48 hours. It was all there: communications with offshore accounts, instructions for disguising transfers as fees and expenses, even discussions about which clients were too distracted to notice the missing funds. Most damning was an email trail showing Blackwell had created a shell company that was receiving consulting fees from Pinnacle. The shell company, Blackwell Financial Advisors, had received over $3 million in the past year alone. "This is enough," I said after we'd documented everything. "We need to take this to the authorities." "Not yet," Jen cautioned. "Blackwell has connections at the SEC. Remember Jeremy from compliance who was fired last year? He tried to report some discrepancies and was shut down. We need more backup." She was right. Blackwell was well connected and would fight back hard. We needed irrefutable evidence and someone with authority who would listen. The answer came from an unexpected source. While scrolling through LinkedIn for job opportunities, I noticed that Sandra Whitman, my former mentor from business school, had recently been appointed as a director at the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. If anyone would take this seriously and know how to proceed, it would be Sandra. I sent her a message, carefully worded to avoid specifics. "Need your advice on a sensitive professional matter. Can we meet privately?" Her response came within hours. "Hazel, good to hear from you. My office tomorrow, 3 p.m. That meeting would be the turning point in our investigation, but it would also put us directly in Blackwell's crosshairs. What I didn't know was that he was already suspicious, and he was about to make a move that would put everything, including our safety, at risk." Sandra's office at FINRA was a corner suite with views of downtown. She greeted me warmly, but her expression turned serious as soon as I mentioned Pinnacle Financial. "I've heard rumors," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Nothing concrete enough to launch an investigation, but enough to raise eyebrows." I laid out everything we'd discovered: the suspicious transfers, the offshore accounts, the shell company, and Blackwell's meeting with the Cayman banker. Sandra listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This is compelling, Hazel, but also dangerous," she said when I finished. "Richard Blackwell has friends in high places. If you're going to accuse him of orchestrating a $10 million fraud, we need to be absolutely certain." "What would make it certain?" I asked. "The smoking gun would be proof that he personally authorized these transfers knowing they were fraudulent, and documentation showing where the money ultimately ended up." She leaned forward. "And we'd need to move quickly. If he's embezzling as you suggest, he'll have an exit strategy." She agreed to help us build a case, but officially, FINRA couldn't act without more evidence. As I left her office, she added, "Be careful, Hazel. People like Blackwell don't go down easily." I should have heeded her warning more carefully. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 6 a.m. 2 men in dark suits stood outside. "Hazel Thompson?" one asked, flashing a badge. "I'm Detective Roberts, NYPD Financial Crimes. We need to ask you some questions about stolen financial documents from Pinnacle Financial." My heart sank. Blackwell had reported us to the police. "I'm happy to cooperate," I said, trying to stay calm. "But I'd like my lawyer present." "That's your right," the detective said. "But I should inform you that Mr. Blackwell has provided evidence that you accessed company files after your termination and removed confidential client information. That's a serious offense." They left after taking my contact information and my lawyer's details. As soon as they were gone, I called Jen. "They came to the office yesterday," she said, her voice shaking. "Questioned everyone about missing files. Mark's been suspended pending an investigation." "I'm so sorry, Jen. I never meant to put you in danger." "It's not your fault. But Hazel, there's more. Blackwell called an emergency board meeting this morning. Word is he's planning to announce his resignation for personal reasons next week. This was it, his exit strategy. Once he resigned, he'd disappear with the money, leaving chaos behind. I called Sandra immediately. Blackwell's making his move. We're out of time. Come to my office, she said. Bring everything you have. I'll make some calls. By noon, Sandra had assembled a small team, including 2 FINRA investigators and a former prosecutor now working for the agency. We presented our evidence, and they agreed it warranted immediate action. We need to freeze those accounts before he can move the money, the prosecutor said. But we need a judge to sign off. While they worked on getting emergency court orders, I received a text from an unknown number. Storage Unit 247, Secure Self-Storage, Brooklyn, code 5581. Look behind the blue filing cabinet. M. Mark had come through with one final gift. At the storage unit, hidden exactly where he'd indicated, was an external hard drive. It contained complete backups of Blackwell's email server, including emails he'd deleted going back 3 years. The emails revealed everything: the full extent of the scheme, his communications with accomplices, and most importantly, explicit acknowledgments that what he was doing was illegal. In one particularly damning email to Renard, he wrote, "The beauty of this system is that by the time anyone notices the discrepancies, the money will be untraceable and will be long gone." When I brought this evidence to Sandra, things moved quickly. By evening, FINRA and the SEC had coordinated with the FBI to raid Pinnacle's offices and Blackwell's home simultaneously. Accounts were frozen, computers seized. I watched the news that night in disbelief as Blackwell was led out of his Upper East Side townhouse in handcuffs. The reporter explained that authorities were investigating a massive fraud scheme involving client funds at one of the city's prestigious financial firms. My phone rang constantly. Colleagues from Pinnacle, financial news reporters looking for inside information, even headhunters sensing an opportunity. I ignored them all, except for one call from Sandra. "You did good, Hazel," she said. "But this is just the beginning. They'll need your testimony. What about Jen and Mark? Will they be in trouble for helping me?" "I've spoken with the investigators. They're being treated as whistleblowers, same as you. There are protections in place." I should have felt relieved, vindicated. Instead, I felt exhausted and oddly empty. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past week suddenly evaporated, leaving me to face the reality of my situation. I was still unemployed, my reputation in the industry potentially tarnished despite being right, and I had just made a powerful enemy who, despite being arrested, still had connections. But I also felt something else stirring beneath the exhaustion. A sense of purpose I hadn't experienced before. The financial world was full of Blackwells, people who used their positions of trust to enrich themselves at others' expense. Perhaps my unexpected career detour was leading me somewhere more meaningful than I could have imagined. The next day, as I was updating my resume, I received an email from Sandra. "FINRA is expanding its investigative team focused on investment fraud. Your experience would be invaluable. Let's talk if you're interested." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Being 2 minutes late had cost me a job, but it might have just led me to a calling. The federal courthouse was imposing, all marble and authority. I straightened my blazer, took a deep breath, and walked up the steps, past the reporters and curious onlookers gathered for what had become known as the Pinnacle scandal. 6 months had passed since Blackwell's arrest. In that time, the investigation had expanded dramatically, revealing that the fraud went beyond just Blackwell. The CEO and 2 other executives had been implicated, charged with either active participation or criminal negligence in their oversight. Today was my day to testify. "Ms. Thompson?" The prosecutor nodded as I took the stand. "Please tell the court about your position at Pinnacle Financial and the events leading to your termination." For the next 2 hours, I walked the jury through everything, from noticing the first discrepancies to being fired for questioning them, to the investigation Jen, Mark, and I had conducted. I explained the technical details of how the fraud had been executed, translating complex financial mechanisms into terms the jury could understand. Blackwell sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed as always, his expression a mask of professional indignation. When our eyes met, he gave me a look of such concentrated hatred that I had to pause mid-sentence. Take your time, Ms. Thompson, the judge said kindly. During cross-examination, Blackwell's attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge, suggesting I had manufactured evidence after being legitimately terminated for poor performance. Isn't it true, he asked, that you accessed company servers after your employment was terminated? No, I replied calmly. All the initial evidence was gathered from reports I had legitimate access to during my employment. Additional evidence was provided by current employees concerned about potential fraud. And you expect the jury to believe you discovered a sophisticated financial fraud that the company's auditors and compliance team somehow missed. The auditors didn't miss it, I said, looking directly at Blackwell. They were deliberately excluded from reviewing the accounts in question. As for compliance, the head of that department reported directly to Mr. Blackwell, creating a significant conflict of interest. By the time I stepped down, I felt drained but satisfied. The evidence spoke for itself. Outside the courthouse, Sandra was waiting. I had accepted her offer at FINRA, joining their expanded investment fraud division. The job paid less than Pinnacle, but it gave me purpose. You did well in there, she said. Clear, factual, unshakable. Thanks. How do you think it's going? The evidence is overwhelming, but financial fraud cases are complex, and Blackwell has an excellent defense team. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down. Guilty on all counts. Blackwell was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to forfeit all assets derived from the fraud. The other executives received lesser sentences in exchange for their cooperation. The day after sentencing, I received a letter from Pinnacle's new management. They were offering me my job back, with a substantial raise and a formal apology. I declined politely. That chapter of my life was closed. My work at FINRA was challenging and fulfilling. I was developing new detection systems for identifying potential fraud patterns, using my experience at Pinnacle as a blueprint for what to look for. Jen had joined me there after Pinnacle's restructuring, bringing her accounting expertise to our team. Mark had landed a cybersecurity consulting job, helping financial firms strengthen their internal controls. 1 year to the day after my firing, I returned to that same subway station. The morning rush was the same, the faces around me similarly stressed and hurried. But I was different. As the train momentarily stalled between stations, as it often did on this line, I didn't feel the panic rise. Instead, I looked around at my fellow passengers, wondering how many of them were rushing to jobs where they feared speaking up, where questioning authority could cost them their livelihoods. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was an article from the Financial Times. Former Pinnacle CFO's appeal denied, fraud conviction upheld. There was a quote from the judge that made me smile. The court commends the courage of the whistleblowers in this case, particularly Ms. Thompson, whose termination for a minor tardiness ultimately exposed one of the largest financial frauds in recent years. Sometimes being in the wrong place at the wrong time puts you exactly where you need to be. Those 2 minutes that cost me my job had ultimately saved my integrity and given me a new purpose. As the train lurched forward again, I put away my phone and smiled. Unlike everyone else rushing to make it to work on time, I wasn't worried about being a few minutes late. Some things are more important than punctuality, like doing what's right, no matter the cost. And in the end, that's a lesson worth being fired for.